Hello, I'm Charlie Latham, and welcome to the Podcast for Podcasters podcast. Today we have with us Paulette, the host of the Maker Muse podcast, where she's on a mission to empower child-free Spanglish-speaking women. Hey, Paulette.
Hello.
So to start off with, if you could let us know a bit about your podcast and why you started it, that would be fab.
I'll give you the short story first, and then we can dive into the longer story if you want to hear that. I started a podcast because I love talking to people. I'm hyper social. I'm like the most extroverted person I've ever met. And 2 years locked inside the house with my husband, I was driving him nuts. And I'd always kind of had this desire to have conversations with people about a topic, and finally decided one day I was like, I can make a podcast and then I can talk to people. And so it kind of naturally progressed from this Instagram lives I was doing at the very beginning of lockdown with people who self-identified as makers. And then we started riffing on the fact that my last name is Erato, which is a Greek muse. And I'm like, I'm the Maker's Muse. I'm the Maker Muse. So, I mean, the name of the podcast is actually the Maker Muse. I think the Maker's Muse is actually something else. But so I just wanted to talk to people about creativity, about where they got theirs and how we could help develop it for people who felt like they're not creative. And then it just, as my, you don't learn how to swim by sitting on the sidelines, right? You got to jump in the pool. And the longer you're in the pool, the better you get. So as I was talking and trying out different ideas, it finally started coalescing into, I want to talk to child-free Latinas like me. Like, we're kind of an anomaly. If you look at it through a certain lens, I think I'm totally normal. Like I'm cool. And I know there's other people out there who feel like me, but we're not represented anywhere. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, all right, come here. We're starting a team. And so here's where we are.
Oh, amazing. So as you say, you love talking to people. I imagine that's one of your favorite things about doing the podcast is making those relationships.
I just love talking to people no matter what. My husband jokes that I'm an energy vampire, but I won't steal your energy, Charlie. I'm going to feed off it, and you're going to go home feeling good, and I'm going to go home feeling like,
yes, I love it.
I'll come home from a networking event, and my husband, I came home at 10 o'clock one time after a networking party that my husband didn't go to with me. And I come home and I am full of energy, and I need an hour to debrief him on everything, and then I could pass out.
So I should ask, how long have you been doing the podcast for?
The podcast is going to hit a year in March. We're recording this in December of 2022. I started working on the podcast about a year ago. So it took a few months to kind of ramp up and, jump in the pool and learn what I didn't know.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine you've seen that there's a lot more to making a podcast than just the conversations. Did you find any big challenges or surprises when you started out?
I didn't start interviewing people until my second season. So I did 2 seasons this year, about 12 episodes each, where 12 episodes of real production and then a couple of mini episodes in between that I kind of just threw together. The first 12 episodes were just me riffing on ideas about art and how we find our creativity. And for the second season, that's when I started realizing what my niche really could be. Everybody out there is always telling you to niche down, become the niche. There's no child-free Latina podcast in English.
Oh, wow.
And I say I speak Spanglish because Spanish is technically my native tongue. That's what I learned to speak first. It was my first language, but I've lived in Los Angeles my entire life. So Spanish is always around, but I conduct 99.7% of my life in English. So it's a melding of those two things. And so for the second season, I wanted to spotlight other child-free Latinas in all areas that I could find and give them a platform for describing how they thrive. Mm-hmm. Because I know how I'm living my life and I'm really happy. And I just wanted other women to come out and celebrate the same way. So I had 11 women from all different walks of life that I met through connections randomly. I met one girl at a brewery. I call her a girl. She's a full-grown woman. She was just younger than me by 20 years. But not everybody was local either. I connected with a woman in Colombia. She actually happened to be in Europe at the time. So the time, we were just talking about time difference. That's always a lot of fun to plan around. So the interviews were great. I love like I said, I love talking to people and I love hearing people's stories, especially when they themselves are storytellers. Editing sucks. As I'm sure you know, editing's the hard part. Editing is really the hard part. And when you first start out learning to edit and then all the other things you can do in an editing session, it's like learning Photoshop. I used to be a photographer. So I took 2 full years of Photoshop in college. I've never taken an editing course, but I've been Photoshopping for 20 years. Editing, I've just learned as I've gone. There's a reason people have degrees and are professionals in that realm. I will never claim to be as good as them. I put out a good enough product is how I feel for a one-woman show.
Amazing. That's so good. And it's great that you found your niche and something that's obviously so personal to you. And I guess has that helped you find guests for your show quite easily?
Well, I wouldn't say it's easy. I've actually, I don't have a backlog of guests, so to speak. There's not a lot of people who will naturally come out and say, oh yeah, I'm child-free and Latina. Mm-hmm. So part of my mission, especially with last season, has been to help women become more comfortable in that. Because on more than one occasion, what I've run into is women saying, I'm child-free, but my family doesn't know yet. Those are conversations I'd really love to explore, like coming out to your family. It's not the same thing as you know, for someone in the LGBTQ community to come out of the closet. I don't want to equate those two things. But there is, especially in Latino American culture, a real, we're a minority. And there isn't a lot of open discussion about not having kids. It is a given that you're going to have kids and you're going to have a lot of them. And the modern generation thinks less so like that. I think especially through the lens of climate change and overpopulation and things like that. But there's still these old school traditions that we have been brought up in that kind of make some people feel anchored, but other people feel constricted. And so I really am loving exploring all of those levels and what it means for other people's parents too. Like I interviewed my own mother because I had never, ever asked her, you know, what does it feel like to have a kid who doesn't want to have kids? I just was like, I'm not having kids. And she was like, all right, whatever. Like I feel like I've had a very privileged and special experience because I didn't get any kind of negative response from it. And I know that's not true of it.
That stigma does exist a lot in that culture that you are expected to have children.
Right.
Okay. So have you found that it's been that to make people feel comfortable coming on your show, most of your guests been quite open and happy to talk about it, or are some of them a bit worried to share that publicly?
So like I said, I don't have a backlog, but I do have a list of people who, when they are ready, they said they would love to come on and talk about it. But the 11 women who I did have last season were all very comfortable, very loud and proud about it. And I hope what that does, if nothing else, is give other people, and not just women, other people the confidence to say it's okay for me too if they're feeling a certain way about it. And I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but some people don't even know themselves whether or not they want to have children. And you know, that takes a lot of introspection and taking out all of these societal norms and expectations and just listening to yourself and your own intuition. And frankly, our society doesn't allow a lot of space for that. So if I can just be an example for people and afford them other examples of an option and show that we are happy and thriving, I've done my job.
Oh, that's amazing. Especially, as you say, if people can hear others having similar experiences and similar thoughts to themselves, it can make them feel more comfortable and open about that themselves, which is only ever going to be a good.
I hope.
Yeah. So you said you've done 2 seasons and about 11, 12 episodes a season. So you must be doing 1 or 2 every week, every month. Is that?
I do them back to back. So it is weekly during the season. Right now I'm on hiatus. My 30th episode will come out at the very end of December, or the week leading up to Christmas. And so I'll be done for 2022. I don't know when this is airing, when you plan to air this.
But probably in January.
Okay, great. So by the time this airs for your audience, my last episode will for 2022 will be up. I'll do a couple more that I'll release in the interim. I don't know when season 3 is starting, to tell you the truth. Okay. But I do have content that will continue to come out, if not weekly, at least twice a month.
Okay. So during seasons, if you're doing back to back, you must be pretty busy then.
Oh yeah. I actually, So what I did the first season, that was released in March of 2022. Every week I tried to get a couple of weeks ahead. It never worked. Every week I would sit there and think through the topic, record it, and then take that transcript and see, well, where can I make this better? And then re-record it. So I just put myself through a lot of work, and then edit, blah, 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 social media, everything. And that would come out. So I would try to get that done by Friday, and it would come out the following Tuesday. So I did that for 12 weeks in a row, and that was exhausting. I said, okay, I'm going to take a few months off. I knew by then what I wanted to do for the next season. So I started reaching out to people I wanted to talk to. And a couple of things fell through, but some of the women I ended up speaking to created such a beautiful narrative, just each one individually and as the season as a whole. But in the middle of all that, I caught COVID. Other people caught COVID. Stuff was happening in the US legal system that kind of impacted our discussions. So it was a riot. So I thought the season would come out midsummer, and it didn't come out until September, I want to say. Wow. August, end of July, August. So, I didn't plan for that, and that's okay. I'm not beholden to anyone else's schedule, but my own, thankfully. I can say that. So I just want to believe that things happened when they were supposed to happen, and it worked out the way it was supposed to work out. And I'm really proud of my podcast. I'm proud of the people I get to talk to and highlight, because it's not about me.
And 30 episodes is a really good milestone as well. That's a decent amount.
Yeah, I didn't even realize it the other day. I was putting the finishing touches. I just let my Instagram family, my Instagram posse, decide what the next episode topic was.
Oh, nice.
And so I was putting, I was like recording an intro or whatever. And I finished, and I went over to my husband. He works from home, so I can always just interrupt him. And I was like, dude, I'm going to have 30 episodes out this year. Do you realize that most people stop at 7? Like, exactly. Yay. I was like, yay, we're going to throw a party.
Oh, that's so good. So how else do you come up with topics for your shows? You said you use Instagram and social media sometimes?
Yeah, I do. I really love reaching out to people on social media. I would spend my entire day on social media if I could. It's so unhealthy. We met on Reddit, right?
Yep,
I love Reddit. It's such a great wealth of information if you just navigate the right subreddits, stay out of the ugly ones. But just like anything, it is what you make it. The child-free community is huge. I do not personally spend any time in the child-free subreddit, but I'm in Facebook groups, and I follow people on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter of all various backgrounds. Because while I think the least interesting thing about me is being child-free, it is a topic that a lot of people have opinions on. So the topic for future episodes are always floating out there in space.
Oh, that's great. And so do you, to sort of change topic that we're talking about a little bit, what kind of software do you use to do your editing or any kind of post-production?
I edit in Audacity. Okay. I record and edit in Audacity, and then I transcribe through either, I think these days I'm using Descript.
Okay.
I like Descript because it's kind of like a Word document. I don't use it to edit because it just doesn't have the flexibility I want, although I know some people love it. And then I compress, export, and it goes up on Buzzsprout.
So you use Buzzsprout to
I
post
do.
to the class. Okay. And do you find Descript is the transcriptions are quite good? They're quite accurate?
Well, when you speak Spanglish, no.
Yes, of course.
My intro is always a mixture of English and Spanish, so it messes it up every time. So I just copy and paste the exact same thing over and over into it. And my outro is also in Spanglish, so that always requires a little massaging. When I speak to different people, sometimes it doesn't capture where the break in our conversation is.
Okay, yeah.
A little bit of that is interview technique, talking over your guest and stuff like that. But also sometimes people have accents, so it's not good at that. But that's okay. I mean, I feel like my job as a podcaster is to get that transcript right for people who have hearing difficulties. I know sometimes I'd rather read a transcript than have to listen to stuff or have to watch a video. The transcript is always really helpful for me, and I don't have hearing issues. So if I can appreciate it, I can only imagine somebody who needs it would feel. So the transcript is a huge part of it. I will put time into making sure that is correct. And there have been times, I'm sure multiple times, I've missed a word here or there. So when I have time, I try to go back. And if anybody ever points went out. I'm like, oh, thank you.
Oh no, edit this quickly.
It's as easy as, a little click, type it out, hit save, it's done. Fixing a transcript is not as big a deal. No, it's if I would have to go back and edit an entire section of audio, that's a completely different story.
Yeah, that's the time sucker right there. So you've been really enjoying your journey as a podcaster.
Yeah. See, I started in the online space as a blogger about 12 years ago, back before I was a food blogger. So back before anybody really knew how to monetize a blog like that didn't quite exist yet. The Pioneer Woman was probably like the first food blogger who got any real world attention. And then everybody started like SEO as a thing nobody knew what that really meant yet. So I spent some time, cutting my teeth in that area and realized I didn't want to write anymore. I don't want to write, but I like to talk. So, navigating a podcast and getting a podcast to be SEO rich and all these other things, I learned from blogging. All of those principles still apply. They're just now it's a spoken word format.
I imagine the skills you learned from blogging are very transferable to
100%.
And so do you use SEO in your podcast descriptions and titles and that kind of thing?
I do try to, but never to the detriment of what the point of that podcast was. Like my titles aren't SEO friendly, I don't think. I try to make sure the descriptions at least hit on something. But for me, it's more important that the message get out there for what we discussed. So, one episode we recorded on the day Roe versus Wade came down from the Supreme Court. And it was interesting because I was interviewing a woman who is not an American citizen and yet still had very strong opinions about that. And I mentioned Roe versus Wade in the description, but I don't think that that's the traffic driver, right? Because I'm a child-free podcast. I'm a child-free podcast for Spanglish-speaking women. I'm not a political or legal podcast.
I'm always thinking of how to optimize things and make them as best they can possibly be. But as you said, the most important thing is actually staying authentic to who you are and the target audience that you're promoting your podcast for.
Yeah, and I'm sure a marketer would have some ideas of how to fix that, how to zhuzh it up a little bit, and in time maybe that will become a priority.
Yeah. So as we wrap up, just before we go, I always like to ask our guests if you have 3 top tips for any people who are thinking about starting a podcast or have just started out already.
Yeah, just do it. Like I said, you do not learn to swim by sitting on the edge of the pool. You got to jump in. You will make mistakes, and that is 100% understandable. It's expected, and it's okay. So just start. Just start. You'll learn on the go. Your first stuff's not going to be great. If you go back to listen to my first 5 episodes, I had a different mic. It sounds like crap, but they're still up because I've learned, I've grown, my message has gotten stronger. So just start, because if I had waited until next March, I wouldn't have 30 episodes under my belt. And instead I'd still be trying to figuring out what editing is.
That's exactly it. And as you say, the best way to learn is through experience and doing it yourself.
Yeah. And this is, there's very little lost if you don't get it right. The first episode, the first 10 episodes, you're going to learn. So you lose nothing by starting from zero and just gaining your experience as you go.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing your experiences, Paulette. If you want to quickly let our listeners know how to find your show online, that would be fantastic.
Yeah. The Maker Muse podcast is available on all platforms, even Amazon Music. I heard one of my guests tell me she listens on Alexa. And you can also find me at themakermuse.co, not .com, themakermuse.co online, both on Twitter. Oh, no, not Twitter. Both on TikTok and Instagram. And that's also the website address.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Paulette.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Charlie.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Podcast for Podcasters podcast. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have any suggestions for us, you can contact me at charlielatham5@gmail.com. That's charlielatham5@gmail.com. Before we go, I'd like to thank the sponsor of our show, Podcast Man. Podcast Man takes the pain out of podcasting production so you can spend more time meeting guests, having interesting conversations, and doing what you love. Find out more at podcastman.co.uk. Have a great day, everyone.